Welcome, one and all, to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station, WWRC, in the nation's capital. I'm your host, Michelle White. Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And I'm joined now by our economics editor at Liberty Nation News, Andrew Moran. Andrew, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've written two very fascinating articles about loneliness, the cost demographically and the cost economically. Share with our viewers a little bit about what you told us in those stories.
Yeah, so the first story actually is part of a broader story that stems from a paper published in August 2024 that determined that loneliness is a $460 billion hit to the U.S. economy through absenteeism. This means people are not showing up to work, and this has an effect, a wide array effect on things like productivity, and that hurts the overall economy. And then you dive deeper into the other challenges of that loneliness affects the economy, and it makes sense too from a philosophical standpoint. If I'm a 35-year-old person, well, I'm 37 technically, but 35-year-old person, and you're alone, you have no family, you have no spouse, you have nothing, and what's the point of going to work? What's the point of waking up at 6 a.m., going on a 2-hour commute, working a job you dislike, and then go back home and go another 2-hour commute? So it makes sense of why people, a 35-year-old individual wouldn't show up to work without any meaning or purpose. And I guess that's more of an existential question that, if you're alone, is there really any meaning to life?
So that is the existential question. Where's the inspiration? But there's more than that. Talk about how this also affects the demographics.
Yeah, so I mean, you see this not only in the United States, but all over the world, where people are not getting married, people are not having children. People, I saw a number recently. I said that the number of people reporting zero friends is at an all-time high in the United States. So this is having a wider consequences for the broader society. In a separate article I wrote, I talked about one of the facets or consequences of this loneliness epidemic, which is actually a thing. I mean, people call it a public health crisis, or health experts call it a public health crisis. And one of the consequences is the death of the cousin. That sounds like a Leo Tolstoy story, but this is true. I mean, this you see this in the data for the last few years, and this is what these health experts have been talking about. Where if people are, even if a man and a woman get together and they have a kid, that's just one child. But back in the day, people would have 2, 3, or 4 kids, and you'd have a growth of cousins. But now you're seeing an absolute decline it's becoming it's eventually going to become a foreign concept to a lot of people not having a cousin. And if from a personal standpoint, my kids, they go to school, and you go on the school bus, and it's just a majority of you have about 100 kids, and a majority of it is just singleton. And people are not going to know what's like having a cousin in the future,
Or a full family of aunts and uncles and grandparents that they may not have a relationship with. What does that do to the family, and what does that do to a generation?
I mean, well, just from the grandparent standpoint, grandparents contribute a lot to a child's development. It even helps their own kids too, because childcare is one of the biggest costs that families incur nowadays. But even the idea of a grandparent is slowly fading away, because a lot of people are having children later in their lives. So even if a child was born, he may have only a few years with a grandparent, and that's sad too, because I mean, I personally I didn't grow up with grandparents. Maybe that's why I am the way I am, which is not a good thing. But overall, the grandparents, just like a cousin, that's eventually going to slowly fade away from our society.
Maybe that's why you're so interested in this story. There are a couple of stories that made national headlines that touch on what you're talking about. One was that grandparents who babysit their children have sharper minds. It tends to stave off any kind of mental decline. And then there were two birth stories that were also surprising. South Korea has just enjoyed, for lack of a better word, they really have enjoyed a burst in births since they're calling it the post-COVID marriages, and they have a 6.2%, little over 6% burst in births, and they were one of the lowest. And the United States, by contrast, suffered a 0.12% decline in births last year. So talk about how interesting that dichotomy is, and then what governments are doing to help.
Well, I mean, that is fascinating because for so many years, South Korea had one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, and they have an aging population. So, I mean, I saw this one chart years ago, and the numbers were showing how there was such a high population of old people and a low population of young people. So that's a positive sign for the
Right.
South Korea, not just on a societal wise, but also economically. For the United States, I mean, you look at some of the survey data and you see why people are not having kids. One of them is the cost of living. Cost of living is sky high. We talked about this earlier. Daycare. I mean, that's such a huge expense. Healthcare costs. That's another thing. Food, diapers, just everything is becoming increasingly expensive. I think the
Hmm.
other aspect too is that a lot of people don't want to have the responsibility of having children. It's a lot of work, a lot of stress. A lot of people are comfortable in their lives. Just going to work, going home, watching Netflix, being on their phones, not having to deal with temper tantrums and soiled diapers and children. On a broader scale, the governments. I mean, I wrote an article months ago talking about one of the biggest consequences or the worst myths that politicians ever made was talking about overpopulation, and now we're
Right.
seeing the consequences of that. Or just talking about the fiscal side of it, where you need to populate a higher population to sustain all these national social programs,
Right.
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, governments are trying to reverse this by fostering child rearing. Hungary, I think, is one of the most famous examples of it, where they want to eliminate the income tax for women who have 3 or 4 kids. They want to other governments are providing stipends. Up here in Canada, they call it a baby bonus, where you get a few $100s a month for every child you have up to the age of 6, and then you have a lower price or lower payments up until they're 18. So all these governments worldwide are doing these things, but they're not seeing the fruits of these efforts. So no matter what they're doing, it's not encouraging people to have children. South Korea, for now, it seems to be the exception, but overall,
Right.
young people are not giving in.
What do you think is behind that? Do you think there's a mental change that people need to, how do you reverse their thinking that this is bad for the planet and good for humanity? Because it's not just the social programs you were discussing, it's turning on the lights in the government. It's paving the roads. Any source of income to keep society going is going to dwindle with the population. How do we turn the mindset of young people that having babies and children are a blessing, a good thing, not only for them, but for society?
That's a $64,000 question that I can't answer. I mean, if I had the answer to that, I would maybe I'd be hired by some government. But I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because there's so many factors to it. I mean, when people go on social media and they see these people who are who they call them dinks, double income, no kids, or they see individuals who are by themselves with nice high income, and they're traveling the world, and they're going to Spain, they're going to Italy, they're going to Germany, and they're having the time of their lives. But someone who's at home on their sofa reading this on social media, they're saying, "Oh, how I can't do this because I have a kid, or if I had a kid, I won't be able to do these things." So I mean, it's very hard to change people's minds. Perhaps over time it will. I mean, you see some of the numbers now. I mean, a lot of conservatives, they're the ones having children, and a lot of left leaning individuals, they're not having kids. So I mean, perhaps over time, that whole idea of family and the nuclear family and child rearing will increase.
Charlie Kirk had that message. He was really driving that home before he was assassinated about how important it was to get married and have kids. You live longer, you live happier, and it's good for not only you, but not only for society, but for you as a person. So he really had a big audience with that. And they played, I don't know if you watched the All American halftime show on Sunday. They played that clip of him at the end talking about how the greatest thing you could do is to get married and have children. And
I say the
we
same thing
know,
about dogs. You have dogs, better for your body.
well, we talked about the psychological benefits. We talked about the societal benefits, but also what about dying alone? If you don't have kids, you have this lifestyle and you live 80 years. And as I said earlier, grandparents who grandparent their children or watch, babysit, take care of their children while their kids work, have sharper minds, no matter what they're doing. So if you reverse that and someone's 80 years old, hasn't had kids, traveled the world, had a career, they have no one to babysit, and they have no interaction with young people, what does that do to their brains?
Oh, no, that's absolutely horrible. I've seen some of the research on this and how loneliness is so detrimental to your brain. I mean, of course, I mean, I love being by myself a lot of the time. I love reading books. I love listening to classical music and all that stuff. But over time, the cumulative effect of that loneliness is just horrible for your brain. One research I saw recently, and it showed that the monotony of life can really deteriorate your brain
Mm.
of the loop where you wake up, brush your teeth, eat lunch, go to work, go to bed.
Hmm.
If you do that by yourself as an old person, that can really weigh on your health physically, mentally, and
Right.
perhaps in your case spiritually. So there are many negative or adverse effects of being alone. And there was just one study I heard on the radio recently that said that older people who have dogs, they go out, they exercise, they go for walks, they get sunshine, that increases their health. So I can only
Right.
imagine the positive health effects of an 8-year-old person who has grandkids or even great grandkids.
Right. I loved going over to my grandmother's house after school, and it was, and I just loved talking to her. And my mom lives far away, so it's hard. It's hard on both sides. But for people that don't even have that, I can't even imagine. So what about Trump's Trump accounts? So he started this Trump account for babies born between 2025 and 2028. Talk about what you think that's going to do for parents or would-be parents and for the economy.
Well, for would-be parents, I mean that's a nice little nest egg that you're putting for your child because over time, because the Treasury Department, when they were promoting the Trump account, they concluded that if you just put $1,000 deposit into the account, never touch it, never contribute to it, never withdraw from it, then perhaps that would grow to as much as $500,000 by the time you reach the age of 60. Of course,
Mm,
that's barring any inflation, but overall, I
right.
mean that's still pretty good compared to the average person nowadays who has about the average retiree, I think, has about $100,000 sitting in their account. So that would be a handsome windfall. But whether that encourages people to take that step to have family, I mean, that I highly doubt $1,000 is going to change anyone's minds. But overall, I mean, that's a positive effect for parents today, and it's a boon for the broader economy. I mean, I saw this. I love criticisms that I've read over this proposal, the program, I should say, excuse me, is that it's a handout to Wall Street. Consider this: the estimated price tag for this program is about $15 billion. Daily transactions on Wall Street is around $400 billion. So a
Wow.
$15 billion price tag
Nothing.
is nothing in the grand scheme of things for the Wall Street.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We return to our guest, Liberty Nation economics editor, Andrew Moran. So, in addition to the Trump accounts, what do you think the United States needs to do, both in Congress and in the administration, to encourage people to get married and have children and have big families?
I guess for the average person, emulating programs you see in Europe or Asia could be one factor. I mean, you could have monthly stipends, you could have paid maternity leave. Up here in Canada, I mean, they increase it to 18 months. In the United States, a lot of private companies they'll give you 90 days, and that's not of course. I mean, that's not enough for a mother, a woman to care for her child. So, I mean, outside of that, you could encourage private companies to provide greater maternity leave for women. Um, Another example up here in Canada, they have paternity leave as well, so the men could split their leave with women, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. Men should not be doing those things. The women be doing that. But overall, I mean, aside from government interventions, it's hard to see what the administration can do. I mean, they could create more affordable. They could foster policies that provide real wage growth. So that's inflation adjusted wage growth that outpaces the cost of living. That's one thing you can do. Bring home prices. That's also another barrier to entry in
Hmm.
the idea of parenthood. It's very challenging for people to afford a place in today's world. The state of the education system. That's another factor. I think parents need to take into account how future that is. So I mean, I think it's a broad array of items that the administration will have to tackle in order to encourage it. But I think just the idea of itself needs to change. The idea of parenthood.
Well, you've hit on all the things that he's doing. He's getting rid of the Department of Education or dismantling it and putting that back in the state's hands. The one big beautiful bill is making life a little bit more affordable. Gas prices are down. Which one of those is not working? Well, of course, we're not going to see the fruits for a while, but it sounds like he's covered a lot of those things. But ultimately, as libertarians or conservatives, we know that the government shouldn't be involved in our personal lives that much. What can society do to kind of cheer each other on and bring and make it in vogue again to get married and have kids? How about go to church, join a club, hang out with your married friends?
You could make that a rhetorical question. I mean, I could joke by saying, I'm a hermit, so I have no clue about what society does, and you can say, well, here's my suggestion. Yada yada yada.
You're not a hermit. My parents used to do that when I was a kid. We always had somebody who was single over for dinner. I don't know, if that was in there. My dad had this buddy Eddie who would never get married, and Eddie was always over for dinner. I think he was trying to show him that married life was a good thing. One more thing I wanted to talk about, because we've talked a lot about what it does to the family, what it does to the society, but what does it do to the kids? Because we know that they need to have a lot of affection and attention growing up. So less people around, less hugs, less attention. We talked about some of those statistic numbers, but do you think it hardens them to getting married later? Do you think it preconditions them to stay single because they've seen things at home that they don't like, or they just are just soured on marriage?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from the affection alone, I mean, take divorce out of the equation. And a lot of parents say, I mean, I have no choice at all because of the way the economy is. They have to put their kids into daycare. And these daycares,
Right.
they're not going to love their children as much as the parents do.
Right.
They're just a product that they have to take care of. And you see a lot. I mean, just from a personal standpoint, you see outside our house, and the kids today. I mean, they don't seem very affectionate. They don't seem quite social too. Our
Right.
kids, they've been home. They were home with their mom till they were 4 or 5 years old, and they went to school. And they're very different from the rest of the children. I mean, they're very clever. They're very talkative. They know how to communicate with people. They're quite happy. They're quite emotionally stable. And you see a lot of these other children. I mean, it's just they don't know how to socialize. They don't know how to communicate. And I think one of that is that they were thrown into those community centers or daycare centers. Another factor too is that so many people are on their phones, and these moms and dads, they have to they're too much on their devices, or they have to work too much, so they don't get
Right.
to see kids. Especially too, we live in an affluent neighborhood, and you see a lot of these rich parents, they depend on nannies to take care of their kids. And so I
Hmm.
think this whole conversation we have, you can't pinpoint down to one specific solution or one specific problem. It's just the way society is these days. It's a whole uh, variety of factors that are contributing to either the cause or the solution.
Well, Andrew, I hope you continue writing about it, because the more you write about it, the more people read it, the more people might sit and think this is something I want to change. And I think just putting that out for our readers to read might be the seed that needs to grow to change people's minds. But Andrew Moran, two very fascinating articles. I suggest you all go out and read them. You will learn a lot, and it might inspire you. Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm joined now by our national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be on your program. Thank you.
So let's talk about Pete Hegseth and his Arsenal of Freedom tour. Tell us what it's about and why this is a good thing.
Well, basically, what he's doing is he's going to a number of the major defense industry corporations and quite a few smaller ones as well. And what he's doing is it's kind of a cheerleading tour for getting them on board with on cost, on schedule, and performing. And it's a perennial problem that I jokingly say this, and it's probably not fair, but it's pretty accurate, I think. The government looks at the industry and says, we need it faster, better, cheaper, right?
Mhm.
Industry says, oh boy, we can make it faster, better, cheaper, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. And, and the government says, great, where do we sign? Well, I think those days are over, and I think that's the point he's trying to make to these corporations. That, in fact, what's going to happen is we're going to make things faster, and you're going to be on cost, or you're not going to be one of our providers, and it's just that simple.
He's whipping them into shape.
He is absolutely, and it remains to be seen whether or not who's going to win here. But I think that with President Trump in Hegseth's corner, I think Trump will win this one.
So how important, we know that it's important, but talk about the real nuts and bolts of why it's so important that we reshore our manufacturing and the defense spending.
Well, it has to do with the security of the supply chain, really. And so that when you have your suppliers all over the world, and particularly suppliers that are in nations not necessarily cordial to the United States,
Like China.
like China, exactly like China, and like China, did I mention China? Um,
China.
uh, that there's always the possibility that one, the sources will be cut off, that there will be pilferage, there'll be obviously the theft of IP, and so it puts the supply chain, which is critical to our defense industry, obviously, it puts it in great jeopardy. And so you have a much better chance of having a very, very secure supply chain if it's onshore. If all of our suppliers, and incidentally, when I say that, I mean I realize that that's going to be almost impossible, but you certainly have to start somewhere. And I think that they are wanting to bring back all of the supply chains as much as they can into the United States so they have much greater security and this supply chain is more secure.
So why is he in New England? Why did he go to New England? I mean, what kind of fruit are we going to see from these visits?
Well, I think that New England probably is going to be, perhaps more on the political side than on the defense side because eh, New England has is an interesting place. I mean, you've got Raytheon and particularly and so you really need to bring and it's a much denser population. There's
Mhm.
a lot of defense industry there, so it makes sense that you would do that. And but you've got other places as well that are equally important. I mean, you've got obviously, Dallas with Lockheed, and you've got Northrop Grumman in California. So you've got a lot of places to go, and whether or not he is singling out uh, the New England for some kind of special treatment, I'm not confident that that's the case.
So when will we start seeing, contracts coming in? How does this take place behind the scenes? Because we're just seeing the headlines. We don't know what's going on, but you've worked in the Pentagon, so you know how this works.
Well, some of the things that you're going to see that will, are kind of clues that something's happening is you'll have what we call a request for information that will
Hmm.
go out to a number of different companies, and everybody then uh, puts in their submission about how they would do that particular thing that the request for information is about, whether it's a new tank or whether it's a new armored personnel carrier, whatever it is. That's the government's way of saying how many of you are interested. And how many of you out there think that you can actually do this? And do you have any better ideas about what this thing should look like than we do? And then there's, you'll see industry days. They'll put out a call for having an industry day. And that's when all of the interested industries come to listen to the program executive officers and the government talk about what it is that they need. So these are kind of clues that
Hmm.
something is afoot. And it's pretty standard fare that that's what's going to happen. So that's what you're looking for. And they just had back in September, I believe, I take that back, August of 2025, they had a big, effectively an industry day for Golden Dome for America and had that
Hmm.
down in Huntsville, Alabama. And so that's where industry got a really good idea of what it is that the government is thinking.
So what is this going to do for our economy? You said that, you jokingly said the industry wants to do it on, delay the process or will delay the process and kind of take the rules with a grain of salt. When are we going to start seeing results for the economy and what will it do for the economy?
Well, I think it's President Trump has said in 2027 that he's going to ask for $1.5 trillion dollars. And that's going to put a lot of money into the economy. And, there's here's kind of a rough order of magnitude calculus. For every dollar that goes into a defense industry, in the surrounding economy, it generates between $5 and $10.
Mm,
So as soon as you start, as these contracts start to, and they're actually beginning to take place, particularly with Golden Dome. And you may have seen there was in the trades a contract that went out for hundreds of drones. And so you're going to, as soon as the contract is let, you start to see the money flow. And I think that it's just we're on the cusp of seeing a rather dramatic increase in dollars going into the economy. The one fly in this ointment, of course, is Congress and the inability of Congress to pass a budget on time.
right,
And it's extremely debilitating for any kind of a program manager who is trying to put a program on some sort of a equilibrium basis so that he can or she can properly manage, because
right.
now when you don't know where your next dollar's coming from, uh
You can't
and
spend it.
yeah, well, that's right. And CRs are particularly onerous in the fact that you can't spend more than you did the previous year.
Right,
And then you if you can't spend more than your previous year and you have a new contract coming up, no new contracts, right?
right.
On a CR.
Mhm.
So now you got to wait. And for every month that goes by, you had a budget that was supposed to be equally distributed throughout those months. Now you got to cram it in to
Last months, right,
the last months of the fiscal year. And of course, that's almost impossible. And so now you've got, unexecutable programs, and they've got this big, chunk of change out there. Congress sees that, and now it's rescission bait. And,
right.
and they take it back.
So, what message is this sending? We were talking about China a little bit. What message is this sending to the adversaries of the US that President Trump is
Oh,
doing all these things?
I I think that they are getting message loud and clear that, whatever you thought was the norm for the United States, think again, because Donald Trump he does what he says he's going to do. I mean,
He
what
does.
a concept, right?
Right.
And he's very interested in having a robust industrial base that's on cost, on schedule, and performing. And the other thing
Mhm.
is that I think that one of the key things, and Hegseth said it in his first speech. Remember, he had a big conclave with all of his industrial CEOs, and he said, I want to have things done with time as the essential element. In
Right.
other words, time to field. That's one of the key performance parameters that we're going to put in all of our contracts. And well, of course, why wouldn't you? And
Mhm.
there was a time when we actually were able to turn things out. You realize that, the F-15, one of the great fighters of all times,
Right.
it went from a clean sheet of paper to a flying airplane in 5 years.
Wow.
You know, the
That's remarkable.
F-16, the F-16 had a fly off, and it was in, approximately the same amount of time. So it can be done, and it's just a matter of, making it worth the industry's time and effort to do it. I have found that the defense industry will do whatever you ask them to do, and they believe that they're adequately and fairly compensated. So, everybody kind of makes them out the villain. Well, they aren't. They'll do whatever you ask them to do, and you make it worth their while. And
Mhm.
you can do that by, putting it into the contract.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Michelle White. And we return to our guest, Liberty Nation National Security Correspondent, Dave Patterson. With all these things that we're talking about, his Hegseth's tour, the shipbuilding that President Trump is reviving, his eyes on Greenland, and whatever's going on behind the scenes there, some of these tariffs, overall, the message is that he's building up America's defense. What is that saying to the world?
Well, I think that says to the world that you know, people have been wondering, what is the Trump doctrine? Well, it's very simple. He says it all the time. It's
He
America
does.
first. I mean, that's the
He
doctrine.
does.
It's, pretty clear. And what it means is to the rest of the world is that just as he said in both the national security strategy and the national defense strategy, that we are going to focus our effort, and that means our industry, our weapons, our equipment, our services, we are going to focus on the United States first. It's not that we're abandoning anyone else,
Hmm.
but we are focusing on our particular needs first. And he has emphasized the fact that the Western Hemisphere is going to be key to the defense, and it's just not a complicated a complicated
It's not.
strategy. America first. That's the way it's going to be, and we're going to continue to. He's going to continue to do that. And I think that even in the his speeches, he does not discount the fact that, yes, we have to have global alliances. They're very important. The United States is not going to, police the world all by itself.
Hmm.
Presidents have said that before, and then they go about policing the world. This is not going to happen with President Trump, I don't believe.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to understand that America first? And why do you think they're so offended by it?
Oh, I think that it's more has more to do with the fact that Trump says it than anything else. The Trump derangement syndrome is a thing. You
It
can't
is.
deny it,
Yep.
and it's just because it's Trump that says these things. They tend to immediately, they're aghast. How terrible! How could anyone have this insular point of view? Well, it's obviously not an insular point of view. I mean, he went to Davos. He
Right.
explained himself pretty well, and he's been very transactional in all over the world and in solving some of the conflicts that have been taking place for years and suddenly are solved.
Right. I don't know if you saw, he posted a video, a montage of some of the things that he said in 1987, and he posted it on Truth Social. And it's so it sums up everything that you just said about his America First and just his business mind on how we were being ripped off and how angry he was that America was being ripped off. And you could see his passion in it. And I posted it on Facebook, and it just set off a firestorm. People were so angry, and just I said, what is wrong with it? Why can he say this and it's wrong in your eyes? I mean, they just go off on these tangents. That TDS that you're talking about is really, it's a scary thing. You can't reason with them. And then I lost a friend of mine that I've had for 15 years, wrote on my Facebook page, I can't be friends with you anymore.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What?
Well, there were a few of those. I had an older friend. I had a friend, a sorority sister from college, who unfriended me because I supported Trump in the last election. But yeah, it is a real thing. It's crazy. But when you take these videos from the 1980s and well into the 90s, he was a well sought out commentator on politics and economics back in the day before he ever came down that escalator and announced he was running for president. And people had him on their shows, news, the same people that criticize him and hate him today. And everything he said, he's stood on and was true to. So I don't understand why America First is a bad thing. And it's not just the rest of the world that doesn't like it, but some Americans are not like it. Some people in Congress aren't liking the America First. So how much pushback is he going to get in this Congress to
Oh,
accomplish what?
I think that he's going to get obviously a perfect score on pushback from the Democrats. But I think that there are enough Republicans, left that that most of the stuff he wants to do in this year, which is a critical year, I
Hmm.
think they're going to be able to pass that. I just, you're exactly right. The things that there's certain things that are just true.
Hmm.
And back in the 80s, it was just as true then and as it is today. One of the things that I think that people were concerned about in the 1980s was globalism.
Right.
That we were losing our identity to a global behemoth that to which we were paying alms. And the same, but Trump says, no, we're not going to do that.
Right.
Our sovereignty is sacred, and consequently, the America first. And again, you ask this question, why not?
Why
Why
not?
wouldn't you, you know, put your country and its
Right.
requirements and its needs above
First.
others?
Right. Right. But they were afraid of globalism back then, and now they're waving the flag of globalism. It doesn't make any sense. But again, like you said, I think it's the TDS that because it used to be that the Democrats and the Republicans were on the same page. The only thing that they differed on was social programs. I mean, the welfare programs. They believe the government should pay for everything, and the Republicans believe in an element of personal responsibility. But other than that, they were both anti-communism. They were pro-family. They were pro-American, patriotic, and there really wasn't much distinction between the two other than how they spend money. And now they're worlds apart. And how do you bring them back to the middle when we're talking about defense from your experience with the Pentagon? How do you bring people back to the middle to see?
Well, you bring them back by virtue of the fact that, hey, listen, if you want this piece of equipment, this weapon system built in your district, then you might want to get on board with with the program and the
So money
that
talks.
yeah, the money talks
We'll build it in your district. Your constituents will have jobs and be happy. And so,
yeah, right. So yeah, and those who are obstructionists, well, they'll have a harder time.
so are you happy with Pete Hegseth's tour?
Absolutely. I
I
think
mean,
it's
are you surprised with some of the things that he's doing, or has he kind of met all of your expectations?
I think I would say that he's met my expectations as to what needs to be done. The idea of having a threat-based strategy is important. After and I use this term advisedly, at the end of the Cold War, we decided that, oh my gosh, we don't need all these weapon systems anymore. It's the end of the Cold War, and let's start to put that peace dividend to work. And what they forgot was that the peace dividend was peace, and in order to continue that, you had to have a very robust military. And they started with the program of, capability-based strategies and capability-based acquisition programs. But they couldn't define what that capability was supposed to do.
Right.
I mean, you had the two major conflicts and one or two minor conflicts that you were supposed to be able to do, but without a specific and well-defined threat. That kind of thinking is sort of, meaningless, really. So now we're back to, I think, what I would refer to as a threat-based programs and programmatics, and I think that that's where we should have been all along.
Have we had a Department of Defense like this before? Have we had a Secretary of Defense who was so, you know, warfighter minded and using some of the strong arm tactics that Pete Hegseth is using?
Yeah, I think that Teddy Roosevelt had a pretty decent administration, and there's a lot of similarities when you
Mm.
start to look at what Theodore Roosevelt and his administration did and how they felt about the world, and Donald Trump and how he feels about the world, and by extension, what Secretary Hegseth is doing.
Dave Patterson, always enjoy talking with you. It's a wealth of information. I really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thank you. Good, fun being with you.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Michelle White. I'd like to thank our guests today, Andrew Moran and Dave Patterson, And I'd like to thank you, our audience, who takes the time every week to tune in and join us on the Radio America Network. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.